for the disconnection. If one of you could just chat to me and make sure that you can hear my audio right now, I'll begin to continue. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Again, I apologize for the interruption. Before I begin, let me pause a moment and take a look. And so again, I apologize for that. All of your work items and artifacts that are responsible for requirements management and test case management are all in the same database. So traceability is intrinsic to the usage of the tool. Also, activities like change management and creating the different tasks and system design requirements necessary to build your products and services are all part of the same common interface and repository, so that planning and building and implementing and sustainment or maintenance become transparent to the usage of the tool. In order to accomplish that, Polarion has implemented a Web 2.0 architecture. That means that all of the clients that you'll see today, the user interfaces, are web-based. So you'll be able to access it with Internet Explorer, with Firefox, and virtually any other browser from virtually any platform. Today, you'll see me use it from a Macintosh and a Windows virtual machine, but I could also be accessing it from an iPad or handheld devices that are prevalent today. Additional clients are included in integrations to development environments like Eclipse and Visual Studio, and even being able to plug into Microsoft Office to be able to refine and develop requirements documents. These interfaces that serve these clients are open. The same tools that Polarion uses internally to develop the software are exposed to you as a customer so that you can extend the tool to areas that perhaps Polarion hasn't even thought of, or that are very specific to your business needs or organization. And below that architecture is a framework of plugins which are developed in Eclipse. That means using common Eclipse tools, you will be able to very quickly move these custom extensions into Polarion in a product-level interface and integration. And built on the Polarion web services and search engines, those are all built on top of a Subversion backend repository. Well, the platform is designed to allow transparent traceability, to be able to constantly ask the question of who did it, what did they do, and when did they do it. This becomes very important for not just tracing the changes of the moment, but being able to look back in time. Using the web collaboration, Polarion will be able to author documents online that will look just like Microsoft Word. It'll feel like you're using Word, but you'll develop these documents from a web browser and be able to break down or decompose the content of the whole document into individual manageable requirements. The tool will be flexible so that any workflow or methodology can be implemented. In fact, I'll talk often about a framework. It's a framework for project management, for systems engineering, for software development, or hardware and firmware development and manufacturing. And using the active wikis and ability to interface with individual assignments and access, you'll be able to collaborate with your teams worldwide at any time. You'll be able to manage test cases and establish the type of audits and quality control reports that you find necessary to be able to offer these the answers to compliance and regulatory questions. With ALM, we'll be able to automatically build events using Hudson and Maven to automate the process of preparing for unit tests or regression tests. And we will also be able to use Polarion to extend all of these plans and work items to the individuals for capacity planning and assignments so that you can replace having to maintain independent Microsoft project forms or other means to plan for the delivery of these services. We talked about the extensibility and compliance. Well, today in the demonstration, we do have a compressed time, and we're going to be covering a lot of information. So we're really just going to scratch the surface on these 4 key areas. We'll talk about establishing requirements. We'll talk about planning releases. We'll talk about the work that's necessary to build the product and then test and then even fix defects as they occur. So to establish this first demonstration scenario, the question is often, why manage requirements? Now, some of us on this call may be very sensitive to the needs of requirements management, and some perhaps not. Well, one example of why you need requirements is to look at terrible failures. And one example is in 2008, the U.S. Census overran a project by $3 billion because they had to revert from electronic data collection to paper and handwritten records. And one of the comments by the Secretary of Commerce was that they did not effectively communicate the requirements and the complexity of those requirements to the contractors who were building the devices, and that's why it failed. Well, the key Polarion concepts that we'll talk about here that reinforce preventing such failures are being able to use the web for collaboration, to use common documents as a means to import data into Polarion and to communicate with stakeholders that are outside of our enclave. So with that, I'm going to move to a Windows virtual machine that is established already and logged into Polarion interface. So this view that you see here is the main home page for an e-library or electronic library project. From here, once I have authenticated, I'll have access to a navigation pane on the left-hand side and a main workspace on the right-hand side. The workspace, of course, will change as I navigate to different topics and modules. But from here, you can see that I'll be able to follow some of the same topics I just mentioned, to develop specifications, to go to releases, or to begin and plan for development. This is a common place where I can use the active wiki system to put new information or information for new users so that they can understand the new methodologies that are being developed or just simply the process associated with any specific project. Now, this one is designed for the products and services you might need to create electronic books and serve them up to a customer through a customer portal, much like a Barnes & Noble or an Amazon.com. So what I've done now is I've moved with that hyperlink to the specification homepage. And this, again, gives me information associated with the requirements for this particular project. I have all of the documents labeled here that have been created for this project. I have a summary of all the work item or artifacts inside those documents, what stage they're in or what status. And this status here, draft, reviewed, approved, relates to the workflow that you see here on the right-hand side. So in addition to the document being approved, each individual requirement goes through a life cycle to be reviewed and approved or rejected. And we'll follow some of that life cycle today. So let's take a quick look at what one of these requirements documents look like. So I can hyperlink directly to it here, and this is going to represent what I would expect to see for the product backlog of user stories or high-level requirements for my e-library project. Right away, you can see that the document itself has a very Word-like look and feel. It has headings, table of contents, and what I'll call unstructured text. This is just information associated with the data that I need to have inside my document, terms and abbreviations. And now here I move into a special section, which is the beginning of the product backlog. So here I can see user stories, and if I highlight this vertical bar, or if I click anywhere, this vertical bar highlights the and brings an icon change to a particular user story. From here, I can modify this. So I could, for example, I could remove this particular screenshot, and I could amend this user story to say, in addition to being able to go through Facebook or Google accounts, I want to be able to work on LDAP authentication. And so I can just simply click and type and evolve and modify my document. Each time I save, however, I'm not just saving the document, but I'm committing changes based on my role and authenticated access to the repository to the extent that all the history will be saved. If I do want to insert a new requirement, you can see that I can just, again, highlight and press return, and now I have a new user story. And I can use this information to develop the user story as necessary. You can see that it has a temporary number right now. As soon as I click Save, it will create a new serialized number for my project. If I do decide that I'd like to include screenshots, it's very easy for me to simply insert either information that's saved on disk, captures, technical documentations, or I can paste directly from the clipboard, as you see here, and then using the mouse I can simply resize as necessary and move this image around until it fits the description that I need to see. So from this view now, I can shift from the document view into a more technical, I'll call it a table view. And the table view still presents me with the organization and order of the document, but it allows me to view all of the work items in the document and all of their specific details. So here we see not just that we have an easy-to-read title and description that matches what's in the document, but we also have a lot of other fields that allow me to assign this particular work item to other people and to move the work item through its workflow state. Interesting for those familiar with Agile development is a user story can have story points that help rate the difficulty or the level of effort needed to implement that user story. And I also can establish custom fields for any work item. So we'll go into more detail with this view a little bit later on. One of the questions that we often get is how does this document get into the system originally? And there's a couple of different ways. One is to begin the document from a template, organically, if you will, inside Polarion, but another one is to import the document. So I'd like to show you an example of importing that document from an existing document that perhaps is part of your own Word repository, or perhaps it's going to be delivered to you via a customer. So here on the specification homepage, I have this import button, and so I'll click the import button. And even though right now I'm importing a requirement specification, I could just as easily be importing a technical design document, high-level requirements, test cases, virtually any document that contains information that's relevant to the project. Well, let's look at this now. So instead of a one-pane view now, I have two panes here in the workspace. I have what's called a preview pane that renders the document based on the rules that are established here in the third pane. So let's move through here just a little bit. You can see that I have table of contents and introductory information as before. But now, when I've encountered some information here, you can see that there are icons for the work items and also temporary IDs. Now, those icons and temporary IDs are determined by the criteria here in this specification. So I can change the name of this document to be unique if I want it to be unique, or if I'm going from a customer document, I can change it to my own nomenclature. I can also set up the space where this document will appear. This space here that I've selected corresponds to the space demonstrated on the navigation pane. And the criteria for creating work items or artifacts is determined by this. So it says mark paragraphs from the document as a requirement if any of the conditions are met. Well, anything that contains the word must, any paragraph that contains must or should will become requirements. So if I move down, you can see that there's also some bullet points. And so I can extend this criteria to say, for example, if it has a list item, then I want to be able to create a requirement for that. So let's note 2.2 administrative interfaces. And when I press the preview button now, it will recalculate the document based on the new criteria. And so we'll see that here, under the same heading now, instead of having bullet points, I have two new requirements that have a child relationship with the initial header. So the indentation of the list item is preserved in a relationship between these requirements. Well, as I move down through here, we'll see also down at the bottom of this document, there's a special section that shows specific validation scenarios or test cases that might be mandated by the customer delivering this document to me. So on the right-hand side, I'm going to add a new rule. And instead of creating another set of requirements, I'm going to create a test case. And the test case will be valid if paragraphs include the words test. And so now I should expect, if I recalculated this document, that I'll create one or two test cases here. And so instead of just previewing again, I'm going to import it directly. And all the temporary data that exists now will be committed to the Polarion database, and we'll begin the process of tracking this document and all of these work items in my project. So now you see that they've been assigned serial information, that they contain the same tables and title and data that we had before. So if, for example, I need to come in and refine this document, like here I have an empty piece here, it must be possible to must be possible to view user roles easily. And so I can simply evolve more requirements beyond the document as necessary, or I could take two requirements here, and if I didn't want to, I wanted to fuse them into one, I can use the simple editing of backspace and return to now create one requirement where there was two previously. On the other hand, if I need to split a requirement into two, then I just simply need to highlight the section in the requirement text and press enter. And if I need to create a brand new requirement, I can simply position the text and click on the requirement icon to be able to create a new requirement. And so you can see that using this interface, it's very easy for users to begin to manage this process right away. Now, one of the things that I've talked about is user story and requirement and test case. All of those represent what I'll call work items. And so here in the navigation pane on the left-hand side, I have a list of the work item types that are valid for this project. So we've talked about requirement and an agile development user story, and we have test cases, and we have some idea how they work together. We also have defects, tasks, and change requests that we'll talk about a little bit later. So as we refine this document, it's very common that we might want to prepare this document for approval or contribution from outside stakeholders, perhaps stakeholders that don't have access to Polarion. And again, even though I'm doing this for a requirement specification, I could just as easily be doing this for system design documents or test cases as well. What I wanted to show you also is, before I do that export, I can expand the view here to be able to see more technical data associated with each of the work items here in the sidebar. So I don't necessarily have to always go to the table view to be able to see specific data associated with a work item. And from here, I can move into specific workflow changes, make assignments to individuals and so forth as necessary for this particular requirement. So I can use the view to evolve and refine the data associated with this requirement as necessary. Well, when I'm ready now to send it to that outside stakeholder, I move up here to the Operations button and select Word Round Trip. Now, Word Round Trip has two pieces. It has an export document and an import changes. When I export the document, I can choose what level of participation or collaboration that stakeholder will be allowed. And I'll choose the middle one here, prioritization, and begin the process. So this will take the data in Polarion and produce a Word document that, for the purposes of this demonstration, I'll download it immediately and open it up. While that's happening, I'm going to pause for a moment and take a look at some of the questions. Okay. Question is, does copy and paste work with documents? Absolutely. So you saw me copy from the clipboard, but inside the document itself, inside the document view, if I had some other section of a Word document open or text someplace else in on my desktop, I could just simply kind of do what I'm doing now, and I'll copy it from one section of the document and just paste into another. So it's going to use whatever information is in that buffer to be able to paste in here. And so I can also copy whole requirements and paste whole requirements as well. Okay. All right. Well, let's go back. Oh, okay. One other question. Can you export other types of documents than Word? Yes. It works with Excel as well, and the round trip works specifically with Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel. However, I can export into PDF format. I can export into CSV format. There's a multitude of formats that I can use to export the data. But as you'll see here, the round trip is quite unique in how it manages the export process, because it's planning to get the data back, hence the name round trip. So this is the document that would be delivered to my stakeholder. And it looks and feels just like what we saw both in the original Word document and in Polarion. But now, instead of just simply having some sections of information, I have data that shows the work item ID and some of the other values. So if we come here to this, let's actually come to the logging in and logging out process. So here's a list of all the requirements associated with user login and logout. And from here, as a stakeholder, I can change the values of severity. So from a should have to a must have, or from should have to will not have. And as a stakeholder, I can highlight any section of text here that I want to comment on. And using the Microsoft Word review function, I can place comments here that will make their way into Polarion. So, changing passwords. Changing passwords must be easy and one step. And at any other place, I can continue to put relevant comments associated with my feedback to the document and whether or not these requirements meet my satisfaction. If I had exported it with full collaboration as a stakeholder, I could actually change the titles and the descriptions of specific work items. But you'll note right now I can't change any of that data because it's marked as read-only. So as a stakeholder, I can modify what you as the exporter, the round-trip exporter, will permit me to modify. Let me go ahead and save these few changes that I've made. And I'll just save it right to my desktop. And you can see that the name of the document carries the Polarion document name. Okay, I'll minimize that for now. So let me double check. Okay, no questions particularly to that. So we've done the first part of the round trip, and we've modified the document. Now it's time to do the complement of the export, and that would be importing the changes. So I come back in the document view to the operations button, and I import changes. And let's see, let's cancel that. In fact, let me undo these changes, because I'd rather not have to worry about any conflicts between changes made to the stakeholder and the changes that we introduced just a moment ago, which is certainly possible to do, but I'd like to make it just a little bit more straightforward. Here's where I can choose to either overwrite the conflicts, or if there is a case when a change I made while the document had been under review, then I'll be able to view those changes and make acceptance of the new changes or override the conflicts. I could also choose just to import the comments as necessary. So I'll just go ahead and bring these changes in. So now when I view this document, I'm viewing the document that incorporates the changes that we just made. So if we remember, we went into the user registration, and actually it was the user login, logout, and we changed some of the priorities from should have to must have and one to will not have. We had some comments that were added, and so if I hover over the bubble, I'll see the comments. Or if I come over here to the sidebar and I just click on the comment button, I'll be able to see all the comments within the document. And from here, I can make replies to those comments or insert my own that can be exposed during the next iteration of the round trip process. So round trip doesn't have to happen just once. It doesn't have to happen just to one individual. It can happen to many individuals, and it can be an iteration. Okay. Well, one of the things that's important to note here is how do we view these changes over time? So as I mentioned earlier, every change to Polarion is made in the repository in an atomic way, and so we track those changes. So I can come to any of these revisions in history, highlight the two, and compare them. And when I compare them, I'm essentially doing something like track changes within Word, but I'm doing it with respect to my specific requirement set. So it's going to show me all of the new comments in green and all of the new changes in green. Anything that was deleted is in red, and anything that is maintained the same is in purple. And so I could move through this document if there were more changes and visualize those, or I can click on this Work Items button and see all of the changes demonstrated as work items. Question is, how do I know that a document has been reviewed and returned for import? That's an excellent question. Essentially, that document would be delivered to the stakeholders either via email or being posted on a common repository. And the document would really have to be sent to you, to a requirements engineer, and then the requirements engineer would have the ability then to import that specific document into the appropriate project. It's important to note that that document gets branded for this project. So I could not take a document that was round-trip exported for eLibrary and import this into Project X, because that document is branded for the eLibrary project. And I guess it would be relevant to note that the process could be automated using the published SDK from Polarion. Okay, well, let's go back to the current revision of this document. I don't want to spend too much time just on requirements, but as we know, much of ALM begins and centers around the concept of requirements and how to move those requirements specifically into the development process. Okay, another question. When exporting to review, can you reserve the document to avoid conflicts? And how do you deal with conflicts if not? You could put the document and all of the work items in a particular read-only state or a sealed state so that individuals could not specifically make changes. But one of the benefits of Polarion is that specific conflicts can be resolved quite easily. And conflicts really only occur if someone has made a change to the same field of the same work item in the same time. Another question, once the review is done, is the whole document sent through mail or only a notification is sent? Well, that depends, since we're talking in this case about word round trip. That is a document that's being prepared to someone who wouldn't typically have Polarion access. With Polarion access, any change results in a notification, and somebody can come into Polarion to make those necessary review decisions and approvals. But when I'm exporting a document through round trip, it's really intended to go to an individual that wouldn't have that access to Polarion. So in that case, the whole document would be sent through mail or published back on that on a SharePoint or a shared repository where the requirements engineer would have access to it. Okay. Well, there is something that's important to note also, in that while I'm working and refining this document, it's going to be necessary to make sure I create all the necessary links between the work items. So if we remember, at the bottom of this document, we had a couple of test case scenarios. And so what I'd like to do is come to this one here, EL 1047, and I'm just going to click over here and copy a link to this particular requirement. Now I'll move down to the bottom of the document where I have the two test cases that we created. And what I'd like to do is make sure that the login requirement is verified by our login test case. And so I'll highlight the test case, and we'll view here in the sidebar the advanced properties of this work item. And so now, as I'm viewing EL 1079 or 1097, I'll be able to paste the link that I just created. And I'm going to establish a strong relationship between this test case and the previous requirement to say that this test case verifies that requirement. Now, once I save that information, these two items are traceably linked. And so whether I view them here in the document or if I move to the table view, we will be able to visualize the relationship between the requirement and the test case. And from one, I can move to view and edit the other. In fact, if changes are made to one of the requirements here, if we enable a suspecting capability, anytime someone comes in to implement a change, this change might be substantial. Maybe a severity has been modified from must-have to nice-to-have. And some requirement change may be affecting the downstream test cases or downstream design artifacts. So when I make a change in that way, you can see that the icon for the test case has been altered so that it creates what's called a suspect flag. Now, if I'm the owner of this test case, or if I'm an assignee to this test case, I've been notified via email that a change has been made and that I have a suspect. In fact, if I go down to the bottom of my navigation window to global shortcuts, I'll be able to view all suspect work items. So this might be something that's a frequent view for a project engineer, to make sure that the ongoing changes of requirements and system design and test cases don't result in downstream changes that have big impact in time and effort, as well as the integrity of making sure that we're verifying or covering every requirement with a test case. So from this test case, I'm alerted that I have suspect links. Now here's where the history becomes so important. So I'm going to go to now the parent requirement, but as a notification, as I'm looking at this, I don't really know who did the change or what happened. So down in the History tab, I very easily move to a view that shows me exactly what happened from one revision to the next revision. Who did it? David Merrill did it. When did they do it? And what were the changes that were made? So from here, I can see that I need to change my test case, because now I have to make sure that the test process is going to cover all of those browsers. So I could come in here and edit the test case as necessary and include information about whether or not it's okay to have the acceptable browser. Once I make those changes, then I can remove this suspect flag and perhaps even create a comment saying, changes reviewed, okay, and then I'll save this information. So when I save it, we'll see as we look at it that the suspect flag has been cleared out, and if I refresh my top browser, that particular work item goes away. Let me pause for a moment with some questions. So the question is, does everyone have to have the same version of Word to edit a document? So for Word round trip, it does require Microsoft Word 2007 or above. One of the versions that uses OpenXML as a document storage method, because we are leveraging some of the capabilities in that structure to build the fields and tie the document to the original Polarion document view. It's important to note the difference between the Word document and what we've seen here in the Polarion document view. The Polarion document view is a container of work items and content. It's not an artifact all unto itself, but it contains many artifacts, and each of these artifacts have that independent workflow cycle. Okay, I think I really need to push ahead to cover some other topics, so let's move to the second main demonstration scenario, which is what happens if you miss a test case. And I used to work for a software company, and that in a previous life, that when I would look at the new version of product, invariably I would find one or two things, problems of functionality that I relied upon. And when I checked back, I would often hear, oh, we forgot that test case. Well, this is an example of a catastrophic failure. In 2009, Toyota recalled 2.2 million cars. They lost $2 billion in sales and in marketing reputation and cost of the recall. And what if that was just due to one missing test case because the floor mat got in the way of the accelerator pedal? Well, we need to be able to establish this relationship between requirements and their test cases. So I'm going to move back to Polarion, and we're going to aggressively move through evaluating the test cases. So let's take a look back at our home page. And from the home page, if you recall, we had specification space, release development, and testing. So I'm going to move to the testing space. And here is where I would establish the test case management of my project. Now, I don't have time to cover it in too much detail, so we'll look at some existing test runs. In fact, here's a test run that I created last time we had a test case webinar. And in this test run, I linked to a particular version of code and a particular development iteration and test specification document. And in that test specification document, I have test cases that need to be executed. This test run is showing me that I still have 2 test cases that have to be executed. And in the past, there are some test cases which have been executed and passed, as we see down here, and some which have executed and failed. And of the ones that have executed and failed, defects have been created. Now that's something that we're going to return to in just a moment. But essentially here, once development has been done against the requirements that have been approved, then these test cases are executed. So we'll execute a test against these 2 test cases, EL 981 and 982. I just click a button and it enters me into the table view in a specific context associated with those 2 test cases. And so from this view, I can move, highlight the test case, and I'll execute the test case. Now when I execute the test case, obviously I'm looking at the description and what needs to be entered in, and what needs to be tested. And so when I execute it, I'm going to give a test result. Is the test result passed or failed? Well, we'll pass this test result. And I could enter in a comment if I want to, or I could just simply save this one test case as executed. If I come to the next test case, and I could execute this test case, but will fail this test case. And so now I'll enter in a test comment, why did it fail? Favorite looks did not display. And that would be the result of expecting to see something that we didn't see in the portal view. Now when I save this particular event, a defect will be created. So right away you can see a new defect is created down below. And we already have the relationship between this test case, all of the user stories or requirements that it covers, and then defects that begin to be created. The defects that are stricken through are ones that have already been resolved. So if we move back now to the test run page, we should see an updated view where all test cases have been executed and some of the test cases have failed. These are the defects that have been created, and then these are the test cases that have passed. Now, the relationship between these requirements and user stories and test cases are established and displayed in what I'll call a traceability table. So if I want to examine the test case traceability of my project, I have a view in the testing space called test case traceability. I'll pause for a moment to look at some questions. Is there integration with any automated test tools? Yes. There's a rich ecosystem of extensions and integrations, so tools like HP Quality Center and are integrated, and in fact you can use the SDK to integrate into your own automated testing, whether they be automatic unit tests or other third-party tools as well. Okay, this is the test case traceability matrix. It's a table which shows me user stories within my project and test cases that cover those user stories. And then, of course, we have all of the specific defects that have been created as part of the testing process. So as I go through and test this, I will see more and more of the coverage. If I have an empty box here, that demonstrates to me that I have a user story that does not have an appropriate test case to cover it. And so as a project engineer or manager, I could make sure that I'm creating test cases that do cover that. So that's as easily done as highlighting a user story as part of the hyperlink and automatically from this point creating a verifying test case. And so the description here could either be simple procedures, or I could create a table that has more of a breakdown of the procedures and expected results. And so as a test engineer, I would develop this test case. Anytime I save it, of course, now I have the relationship of that test case to the user story established. Okay, well, what happens now when we have the defects to work on? So let's take a look at those. Now, I can view those in many ways. I could go back to the traceability table and find a defect. I could start looking inside my requirements document and find a defect. Or I could run through and view all the defects that are unresolved. And so I can do it here from this view, or suppose I didn't really know where to go. And all I knew is that I had a defect somewhere in the portal, and I thought it was done in the TN webinar test run. So all I need to do is type in a value into the search engine, and it will automatically display all the specific work items and documents associated with that. What I'd like to do is focus on one particular defect. Let's look at EL172. And you can see that this has been assigned to David Merrill. It's in a status of open. So I'm going to move that status to starting progress, and I'll save that information. And now I begin my work on this. So maybe I'd come in here and create a comment to say, now I'm finally working on this. And as a developer then, I would go to my integrated, my development environment to create the fix for this. And so for me, that's going to be Eclipse. So I'm going to open up my Eclipse application, and you can see that in Eclipse, I have here a list of tasks, and I can open up the eLibrary defects. So I'm going to open up eLibrary defects and highlight EL172. And when I do that, it's automatically opening up all the work that I've done previously on EL172, including information about the work item artifact here in Eclipse, as well as the source code that I expect to make changes to. So I'll make some very basic changes just quickly so that we can see the effect. And as many changes to the files that I make are tracked within Eclipse and the association to the Polarion. So I'll save this information, and now I'm ready to commit those changes back to the repository so that I can link them directly to EL172. So when I do that, I'm going to simply come up here and go to the Subversion commit, and when I make the commit, it's automatically inserting a commit message that will allow these changes to be linked directly to my artifact. I'll make that commit change now and check in a little bit. I see there's some more chats here. So some questions. Is there an IntelliJ IDE integration with Polarion? No, there isn't that particular IDE integrated already. Again, though, using the SDK and how you use the particular IDE itself, you can work with Polarion Services Organization or independently create the necessary hooks to your particular IDE. It also does not require an IDE at all to be integrated with Polarion. Whether I'm using Subversion as a way to commit changes to a repository or Git or other tools, you can still link the Polarion artifacts with the specific revision changes to your source code. So let me slide back to Polarion now. And what I'll do is simply refresh this page. And so now let's go take a look at what happened to this particular artifact. So down below here, you can see that I have two revisions, and one is a recent revision here, and this is the one that I've just I've just completed. So from here, you can see that I'm linking directly to the source code. I'll open up that source code, and this is now going to let me view the actual repository where I can see the change. And if I want to drill down deeper, I can actually do a side-by-side comparison of the last 2 revisions directly from the web interface. And so from these changes, now, I can trace back from the source code to the defect that I'm working on, to the test case that created that defect, to the particular high-level user story that set up the requirement that created the defect. So as I work and develop change requests, defects, system design artifacts can all be linked to the new code, to the changed code or modified code, or technical models that aid in the process of creating mechanical engineering projects as well as software and firmware development. Question, do we have a similar interface to MATLAB editor environment as we have for Eclipse? No, Eclipse and Microsoft Visual Studio have a special IDE that has been developed based on their popularity. Now, specifically for MATLAB, this is an example of being able to use MATLAB scripting capability in the interface with the Polarion SDK, so you can do similar events in MATLAB to itemize the work items that are assigned to David Merrill. When David Merrill is in MATLAB, I make my MATLAB changes, and when I want to commit those models to whatever repository I'm using, I can merge those requirement requirement information or work item data into my commit statement itself. And as long as I'm using one of the source code repositories that Polarion can manage, then we'll be able to automatically track these changes. One of the things that's also relevant to point out is let's go a little bit deeper here. As we work and make changes to source code, let's go back to 172. It's absolutely possible to independently link to different revisions. So even though I did it automatically before directly from Eclipse, I can just as easily create other links to my subversion or external repositories. Now this project doesn't have an external repository, but I could look for any or all commits to a particular repository, highlight the particular one that I want to link to this artifact. I'll just pick one at random. And now when I save that information, I'm now manually linking that source code change to the repository. Coming up towards the end of my time, and I have missed some of the important concepts of ALM that I'd like to just touch upon in the last couple of minutes. And that is being able to plan releases and plan the development process itself. So here earlier, we saw that there was a releases space. And so if I go to that releases space, from this page, I can plan major and minor releases and publish that information so I can move quickly to see information about a particular release. And by that information, I mean how many requirements and user stories are in that release. What is my progress towards fulfilling that? And here you can see, importantly, all of the different requirements and user stories that were included. Let's look at version 1.0 since I think that's a more substantially developed release here. If I want to be able to take a look at the live plan, which is going to give me the capacity planning for individuals that are working on implementing these requirements and stories and resolving these defects, I just have to click on this hyperlink, and it will be able to render for me all of the individuals that have been assigned to this particular release and what their assignments are. And so I can move through and look at different data points, different release schedules and time points, and see more and more of their capacities as I move through and plan for their development. Well, that lets me look at what's planned in the release, and now as I take a release and break it up into smaller development iterations, I come to the development space. So this development space gives me an ability to break up these iterations within major releases. In the agile world, I will call them a sprint, but if you have some hybrid or a different model, it can simply be a unit of development that is going to be tracked in a minor release number, so to speak. And so from here, I can download the nightly builds that have been automated, and I can have my eLibrary application directly delivered to my desktop for testing. And perhaps most importantly is the ability to set up plans for my specific development strategy and methodology. So here is a page that will document what my methodology is, and then as I implement that methodology as a manager or an engineer, I'll be able to view the progress of all of the work items that are included in that particular sprint or development iteration. And so as I move down through here, you can see that requirements are in a various stage of completion. Some are still in draft, some are reviewed. And as I move through here, the goal is to take all tasks and all defects that appear in the first column, which is the to-do column, and migrate them into the done and verified columns. So this is a common dashboard for an engineering or development manager to be able to check on the progress of their particular development project.
Rob 上次去酒吧的时候，上次说了，说今天上去跟他说去酒吧的，我也找他去。
Question, is there any user account or user rights for access to the website? Absolutely there is. In fact, you can use user and role management to control access to individual work items, to individual documents, or to different projects, as well as to your repository source code. This user account information can be delegated through LDAP, so LDAP authentication handles it, or you can set up local users and account information in Polarion itself. Okay, well, we've come to the end of our time. What I'd like to do now is I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and publish a
9号、10号2天，对吧？什么？填休假单。对，我就填了2天。我觉得美国人他应该在这个年会这个成本上面，就按全票去核算这个成本。对呀。然后呢，如果你能够订到更多的票，真的说公司节省成本了。要否则的话，你没有一个目标，你怎么去衡量啊？
一去订票。
是啊，而且他统一订票也好，对，这样也行。
这样它成本它集中跟那个一个旅行社，
对
那个 President Club 哈，
对
它就是这么办。
而且他还免着去challenge每个国家，说你这个干得不好，对不对？
对啊。
反正这个都是你定的。
对，他应该统一定，这样谈一个 package 其实最合算了。
对对对，说不定还有返点呢。
就是啊。
干什么？现在还有没有中国去到上面的那个游轮呐？不知道到美国的那个船呐？
从哪儿到哪儿啊？
从中国
到
美国。
你说是游轮还是说？
就是坐船去，然后像坐船去的有没有啊？
得天津什么那种港口城市。
那玩意以前那个什么孙中山他不闹那个坐船嘛是吧？像那什么钱学森他们是吧啊？
对呀。
只能坐船。
海里漂1个月吧得。
嗯。
哎呦，我跟你说，坐船很难受的。
嗯，怎么呢？
晕呐。
坐船晕，那么大船还晕呐？
晕，我那个09年我不是去美国那个，去那个 kick off 完了以后，我们就坐那个
迈阿密是吧？
去迈阿密的嘛。那船哈20万吨的。
那时候那很大了也是吧？哦。
你上面加上服务员4000多人。
哦。
你到了上面一开出去，你就坐在那床上，我就开始头晕了。
哦。
我当时我上船的时候，我就想着带着乘晕饮，因为我本身就容易晕船嘛。根本就吃了根本不管用。正好我一个朋友带了那个，就是贴耳朵后面那个，给了我2个，那一贴是管3天，72小时。
还是有用是吧？
他给我了2个，我中间换了一贴上立刻什么感觉都没有。
那是什么是？
它是中药的。
哦，可能是，我觉得可能是抑制你神经的某一个部分，有可能是。
对，结果我就觉得特管用。
那在那个船上面晃吗？
晃啊！我跟你说啊。
那晃的话怎么吃饭啊？
没有，它那个就特别大，然后那个有的时候呱一到岸上，你看啊，它就那个乘风破浪，真是那个什么。一到晚上，漆黑一团，飘在那儿，真是个小树叶飘在水里，就是那个。
那挺吓人的。
漆黑一片，我们晚上到那甲板上往下看，就看哗，那个水那个浪那么往那。
挺吓人的。
掉下去一个人。我看过美国一个故事片，看完那个我说，我看完泰坦尼克，我说我打死也不上那船。结果我老公非约这2个朋友一块儿那个，非一块儿要去，我没办法就去。有一个船你知道讲美国那个真事儿的拍的电影，就是他们去那个去潜水应该是坐的那个快艇都是拉到海中央了。
对对对。
当时他们那个回岸的时候就数那个救生衣，其实少了2个人，他们就没算好。肯定那个教练有问题，没算好。那2个人一男一女，就到了海中央，等他们发现那个船已经开走了，回大船了，回岸了。就这2人活活就在海里，就看他们怎么去弄，最后就冻死。一到夜里，
对，那肯定的，
很可怕。
对，我也是。
哎呦，真吓人！
前几年不是在香港发生一起这个事，那个谋杀案嘛？你看那就那个男的是广州人。他是一个公务员，把他老婆在那个澳门的一个游轮上面把那个推到海里去了。哎呦！后来被香港陪审团判了终身监禁嘛。终身监禁，那太可怕了。这扔下去，我跟你说，真是一点茫茫大海，什么也看不着。他那个还是大白天，就杀人了。是别人看见的是吗？他不是没有人，最后因为香港的法律有可能跟那是英国的法律那种制度，就通过陪审团去裁决你的那个没有证据。那怎么发现了呢？他就是没有。